Welcome in, everyone, to this deep dive into Romans 8.28. It's one of those verses that I think we all find comforting, but sometimes it's a little perplexing, you know?
Yeah.
It promises that all things work together for good, but then, life can be really unpredictable,
Mm.
and sometimes it's really messy. So it leaves us wondering what that good actually looks like in our own lives. And you've shared an article with us that really dives right into this question. Can every hardship work for good? Understanding Romans 8.28. So are you ready to unpack this together and see if we can find some wisdom in here?
I'm so ready. Let's do it.
Okay, awesome. So I think a good place to start is with the foundation of this whole thing. The article highlights the different versions of Romans 8.28 that are found in the King James Version.
Right. And I think that's a really good starting point because we can see that even though the wording might be slightly different, the core message is the same.
Great.
God is at work in our lives, and he's working to bring about good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose.
So we've got all things working together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. What jumps out at me right away is this idea of good. What does that even mean?
Yeah.
Is it always about a happy ending or a problem that gets solved? Or is it possible that this good that it's talking about could be something totally different than what we're expecting?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's something that's worth thinking about because what's so interesting about Romans 8.28 is that the good isn't necessarily about saying that there won't be hardship.
Yeah.
Or that we're guaranteed to be successful in the world's eyes.
Right.
It could be talking about spiritual growth or our character being developed or even using our own experiences to help other people who are going through similar things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Actually, there's a great example of that in the article Pastor Todd Hoskins' story.
Yes.
When I first read that, I have to admit, I was like, okay, where's the good in this? This guy was publicly attacked in a newspaper article. But then when I read about how he responded with forgiveness instead of fighting back, that was powerful.
Yeah, and it's a powerful example of what it looks like to choose faith over fear, to choose trust over retaliation. And the really amazing thing is that his decision, it came from his faith in God's ability to work things out for good. It ended up having a much bigger impact than I think he could have ever imagined.
Yeah, it actually spread his message further because of the controversy.
Right.
So instead of hurting his ministry, it actually amplified it. It's like this unexpected twist,
Right.
what was meant for harm ended up serving a much bigger purpose.
Exactly. And I think that gets right to the heart of what's so profound about Romans 8.28. It's not about us trying to avoid hardship. It's about trusting that even when things are really painful or confusing or they seem really unfair, God can and will use those experiences to shape us and to refine us and ultimately to bring about something good that lines up with what he wants to do in our lives.
What I really love about this article is how they use the cake analogy to explain all of this.
Oh, yeah. Such a good analogy.
You start with all these raw ingredients that by themselves you wouldn't want to get them. Flour, raw eggs, maybe some unsweetened cocoa powder. Doesn't sound very good.
Not at all.
But then when you put it all together and you bake it, it transforms into this amazing, delicious cake.
It's a great way to think about it because it's so easy to get caught up in the rawness of our experiences.
Right.
All of those difficult ingredients of life.
Yeah.
But what Romans 8.28 is inviting us to do is to trust in the master baker.
To trust that he knows what he's doing.
Yes.
Even when we can't see the final product yet.
Exactly. And I think that requires us to change our perspective a little.
Yeah.
It's not about pretending like those raw ingredients aren't there or that the process isn't messy at times. It's about acknowledging what our circumstances really are, but at the same time holding on to the belief that God is using all of those ingredients to make something good, something that has purpose, something.
Delicious.
You got it.
Okay, I had to go there. But seriously, it makes me think, what are those raw ingredients in our own lives? Those things that God could be using right now to make something extraordinary.
That's a good question to be thinking about. And I think as we continue in our deep dive today, we'll explore that even more. But I'm curious about you. What stands out to you about this idea of good and how it might look different than what we expect?
It's funny, because we talk about trusting the process, but it's so easy to lose sight of that when you're right in the middle of something difficult,
Yeah.
Like, okay, God, I see the flour and the raw eggs, but where's the chocolate and when's this cake going to be ready?
That's so true. I think a lot of times we want to rush the process.
Yeah.
Like we want to see the good happen right away. But the reality is that God doesn't usually work on our timetable.
Yeah, I think that's why the part in the article about Romans 8.28 not being about instant gratification really stuck with me, you
Yeah.
know? It's not like a magic wand that makes all our problems disappear
Right.
or guarantees that we'll never experience pain.
Exactly. It's not about skipping over the hard parts of life.
Yeah.
It's about realizing that hardship is often a necessary part of growth.
Okay.
You know, it's those challenges that can refine us and make our character stronger and deepen our faith.
So it's like sometimes the good that God is working towards isn't so much about changing our circumstances, but it's about changing us,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah.
Like changing our perspective and our hearts and our ability to trust Him even when things don't make sense.
Absolutely.
Uh,
And that kind of change,
Yeah.
it rarely happens overnight.
Yeah.
It takes time and patience,
Yeah.
and it takes a willingness to let go of our need to see results immediately.
Okay, so it's less about God waving a magic wand
Hmm.
and more about Him slowly and steadily kneading the dough of our lives,
I like that.
you know, shaping us into something.
Stronger, more resilient, more compassionate,
Right.
like becoming more like Christ.
Yeah.
You know, he endured suffering too, but he came out of it with even greater purpose and power.
And that brings us back to the other key part of Romans 8.28, those who are called according to His purpose. How does understanding our purpose tie into all of this? You know, this idea of trusting that all things work together for good.
Oh, that's such a good connection.
Yeah.
Because if we truly believe that we're called according to his purpose,
Yeah.
then even the hardest things we go through can be seen as opportunities for us to live out that purpose.
Okay.
You know, it's about realizing that our struggles aren't just random or meaningless. They're
Mm.
part of this bigger story that God is writing with our lives.
So even if we don't understand why we're going through a particular challenge, we can trust that somehow it's connected to the purpose that God has for us. It's like
Yeah.
He's using those experiences, those raw ingredients, to prepare us for something that we might not even be able to see yet.
Exactly. And that's where faith comes in. It's about trusting that even when we can't see the whole picture, God, he knows how it all ends. And
Yeah.
he's working to bring everything together for good according to the unique purpose he has for each one of us.
You know, I'm starting to see how this whole trusting the process thing goes beyond just getting through tough times.
Mm-hmm.
It's about actually leaning into those challenges and asking God for guidance and looking for how He might be using them to shape us and move us closer to fulfilling His purpose for us.
I love that. That's such a powerful insight
Yeah.
because it's not about just sitting back and waiting for the good to show up.
Yeah.
It's about working together with God in the middle of our struggles, asking him to give us wisdom and trying to understand how he might be using those experiences to equip us for the journey ahead.
So instead of saying, God, get me out of this mess, we should be saying, God, what are you doing in this mess?
Yes.
What are you teaching me about myself and about you and about your purpose for my life?
That's a great way to put it. It's about moving from a place of fear to a place of curiosity and collaboration.
Hmm.
It's about realizing that even in the middle of our struggles, God is there. He's at work, and he's inviting us to join him in the process of being transformed.
You know, thinking about it this way, it makes me wonder if maybe sometimes we're so focused on the good being the end result
Right.
that we might actually miss out on experiencing all that God wants to do in and through us.
I wonder that too.
Hmm.
Are we so fixated on the outcome, the perfect cake, that we miss the beauty and the growth that's happening while it's being mixed and kneaded and baked?
Maybe the good isn't just about the destination. Maybe it's about the journey, too. You
Mhm.
know, maybe the good is also found in the character that we develop and the
Yeah.
lessons that we learn and how we grow closer to God as we go through the ups and downs of life.
That is beautiful. And it makes me think of that quote by C.S. Lewis. Hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny.
I love that. It's like those raw ingredients that we might see as negative or something we don't want. They're
Mhm.
actually essential for us to become the people we were created to be.
They're the fire that refines the gold, the pressure that creates a diamond. That's a great way to put it. And speaking of those raw ingredients, I'm curious, how have you seen this concept of Romans 8.28 play out in your own life?
Mhm.
Have there been times when you've been able to look back and see how God was working even when things were tough?
You know, there was a time when I was facing a big setback in my career. I had put so much time and energy into a project, and it just completely fell apart.
Oh.
It was a huge disappointment. And honestly, I felt like I had failed.
I can only imagine how hard that must have been. What helped you through that?
Honestly, it was Romans 8.28. That verse kept coming back to me. It was this reminder that even though I couldn't see it at the time, God was still working. He still had a plan for my life. And he would use this experience for good.
Did you have any idea at the time what that good might be?
Not at first. But as I leaned into my faith and asked God for guidance and kept pursuing the things I was passionate about, I eventually found myself in a new role that was even more fulfilling. And it really felt like it was where I was supposed to be.
So the setback, the disappointment actually led to growth and a new direction. It did. It was painful and it was hard. But looking back now, I can see how God used that experience to improve my skills and to give me a clearer vision for the future. And it led me to a place where I could use my gifts and my talents to make a bigger difference. It was a powerful reminder that God's ways are not our ways, and His timing is perfect even when it doesn't make sense to us in the moment.
It's easy to get caught up in our own timelines and expectations. But it sounds like you really chose to trust God and surrender to His plan even when it was hard.
It wasn't easy,
Yeah.
but it was the only way I knew how to make it through. And what's interesting is that the experience didn't just change my career path. It also deepened my faith and my understanding of Romans 8.28 in a way that I never would have imagined.
Wow, that's so amazing. It's like the very thing that you thought might derail your purpose actually ended up making it stronger and more refined. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes those raw ingredients are exactly what we need to experience the fullness of what God has for us. It's so encouraging to hear how Romans 8.28 has worked in your own life. It makes it so much more real.
It does.
It's not just this abstract idea out there. It's something that's actually happening. It's something we can see happening.
It is. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about sharing our stories.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds us that we're not alone in this.
Yeah.
Other people have been through similar things, and their experiences can give us hope and encouragement.
And maybe even inspire us to look for those Romans 8.28 moments in our own lives.
Yeah,
Those times when we look back and we're like, oh, wow, God was working even when I couldn't see it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like those moments become these little reminders along the way,
Huh.
pointing us back to the fact that God is faithful and He's always working to bring about good.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Romans 8.28 today, what's the one thing that you really hope listeners will take away from our conversation?
I think if there's one thing I hope people remember, it's that hardship isn't the enemy. A lot of times it's the very thing that God uses to shape us and refine us and draw us closer to Him. It's an invitation to trust His process, even when we don't understand it, to let go of our need to control everything and just embrace the mystery of how His plan is unfolding.
It's about remembering that we're not just baking a cake here. We're part of something much bigger, a masterpiece that God is creating with our lives.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing is that even when we mess up, even when we make mistakes or we have setbacks, God can still use those things to create something beautiful and purposeful.
So no matter what you're going through right now, remember Romans 8.28. Hold on to the hope that God is working even if you can't see it. Trust in His goodness even when it's hard, and know that you are called according to His purpose. And that purpose is so much bigger than any difficulty you might be facing right now.
And the next time you're going through a tough time, instead of asking, why me? Maybe try asking God, what are you doing here? What are you trying to teach me? How are you using this to help me become the person you created me to be?
That's such a good challenge for us all to remember. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Romans 8.28. We hope it's given you a renewed sense of hope and a deeper understanding of just how much God loves you.